All right. So this year we did the prompt on fear and resentment. So I'm going to go over my thoughts and my perspectives. I definitely had to think this one out a little bit longer than I was expecting, and I tried to put the times down with this. So I knew right away I wanted to do my positions, perspectives, and assumptions because it really helped with the last one. And the first thing that I noticed was that this is a quote from the United States representative. So this is somebody in power, somebody who's in charge of a lot of things that's going to change the rhetorical situation. If you're trying to convince someone that they need to get involved in an issue or perhaps change their thinking on an issue, trying to scare them is not always effective and can actually sow resentment. So the very first thing I think of is like fear tactics in politics. That's the very first thing I think of, but I don't want to jump ahead too much. I want to break this down a little bit. I didn't really like break down positions and perspectives because there's only one position and one perspective. So I jumped straight to assumptions. So a United States representative believes that scaring isn't effective as it can lead to resentment. And I was like, yeah, if someone finds out you attempted to scare them, they could become resentful, but it's that like big if there. And I think like if somebody is in this big of power and they're using fear tactics, the people that believe them might not be aware of the fact that fear tactics are being used because they're too scared. Another assumption, people need to be convinced to get involved. He says if you're trying to convince somebody that they need to get involved, some people don't need convincing, some people do need convincing. I said yes originally, but I'm like, maybe, I don't know. But one of the things I was thinking about was it's more likely people are following someone's lead than enacting unique change. Like you have less leaders than you do followers. People don't often change their mind on their own. Yes and no. Self-reflection is difficult and requires tools. So this is where I'm kind of like, that might work with fear. Like sometimes you have to scare somebody into reflecting. Fear is sometimes effective. Yes, especially in emergency situations, much like our other prompt. Wanting change leads to resentment. And so I was trying to think of the other side. So using fear to enact change leads to resentment. But like, isn't that person going to gain resentment if that change never happens and then they become desperate, so they use fear tactics to try to get it to happen? If you feel like the only way you get to change is to use fear tactics, that desire is derived from resentment. So it kind of made everything a little bit more murky. Now that I look back on it, I don't know if I agree with all of these things. I see more nuances there. And then I turned the command into a question. To what extent does persuading others with fear lead to resentment? And here's my initial reaction. If someone is resentful because they are being persuaded, then they are being stubborn and wouldn't be willing to change their perspective anyway. I was trying to think outside the box. My first instinct was just like, duh, if you try to scare somebody, it could make them feel resentful. But I'm like, there's got to be more here. Like, why does that resentment happen? Why do people feel fear? Are we talking in the context of situations in power? Are we talking in the context of individual relationship? So then I just started brainstorming, and I am going to actually read this to you because this is literally just what I was thinking. And maybe you don't write this out, but I did so you could see it. Sorry, I'm tired. As a US rep, he is likely speaking from a national perspective. I agree that a nation should not be run on fear because you don't want your country to build a resentment towards its leaders. However, sometimes the truth is scary. We cannot assume that any time someone attempts to enlighten us on an issue that is difficult to grapple with, they are, quote, trying to scare them. This is really tough. I'm having a hard time organizing my thoughts. I guess I think that if someone in power tries to make something scarier than it is in an effort to get the change they want, people should be resentful towards that. However, in the same vein, if a leader is not truthful about a devastating or scary situation for fear of garnering resentment, then that devastating thing can come to fruition. Okay, I think I have my nuance here. So now we need to address the scary thing without manipulating things to become scary. So now that I've kind of thought it out, I'm like, I see where I can take a side, but also like address the counter. So here's me drafting my thesis. I break the structure a lot. And so I went back and I made sure, like, okay, did I give a counter and did I give 2 points? So here's the draft of my thesis. People in power must be transparent when it comes to dangerous, difficult information. However, using scare tactics as a primary form of conviction is highly ineffective. So I am saying that his argument is valid. U.S. Representative Carlos Curbelo poses an incredibly valid argument that using fear sows resentment, specifically because dramatizing the present manipulates the future, and when truth surfaces, trust will shatter. So I'm 20 minutes in now. I'm like, crap, I really got to start thinking about this as an essay. So at first I started thinking about dramatizing conflict in the present manipulates the future. And I was thinking about COVID vaccine and the COVID pandemic. I was thinking about January 6th and Michigan Capitol. These people felt like the pandemic was being dramatized and in turn felt manipulated and revolted, regardless of whether or not something is true. Dramatizing it or using what is perceived to be as fear tactics will eventually fade away, and then that resentment comes. And then I was like, how can I do this? This is a very big scale. So what about like an individual scale? And I was talking about the concept of embracing pronouns and how you have, if you have a group of people that like refuse to embrace pronouns, it's creating a fear, and the people who are requesting the pronoun, makes it so they lose trust. And then I was like, wait a second, these people are losing trust, but these people lost trust too. And so that's why I went back and I changed this. Dramatizing conflict deteriorates trust. And then when I got over here, I was like, I gotta make this bigger, because I said when the truth surfaces, trust is shattered. Trust will be shattered. I don't know what it. Trust will shatter. But it was almost too close to this, and I was like, okay, I need to take it a step further. Yeah, I just said that it's going to lead to deteriorating trust. So what happens in response to that? When trust is shattered, repair is increasingly difficult. So I'm taking my argument a little step further. Instead of saying that A leads to B, I said A leads to B in my first part, which ultimately leads to C in my second part, because I wanted to separate my 2 points a little bit further. And I was immediately thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then I was like, I don't know, multi-level marketing. I was trying to think of something. I ended up scratching that because I thought it was stupid. And then I was like, oh no, it's 9:23. I have until 9:45. I really, really need to start writing. So I started writing. I simplified my thesis a little bit. I think I used the structure. And then, excuse me, I started writing my first paragraph. I thought it went really well. And my second paragraph, look, it's a little bit shorter. I also ran out of time to do a justification. But my second paragraph, I was like, oh, I don't have a second example. But then it kind of came to me, and I paired it with the concept of quiet quitting. So feel free to read that. Let me know how you think. It was 9:45, so I stopped. But later in the day, I was like, I should also write a refute so you can see how I would do that. And I tried to make it a sophisticated refute by giving an example. I'm so sorry. My example was exposure therapy. So read through that. This paragraph, I will say, I wrote over like an hour because I was teaching, so I kept getting interrupted. So I don't know that it's a true representation of what I could have produced in the time that I got, but I wanted you to see what I did write. I believe I started writing my essay around 9:10, so it took me about 13 minutes to brainstorm everything, and then I wrote until